Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm coming through clearly to everyone. First of all, I want to say good morning and excited to be here and excited to have you all with us this morning to engage in a really important discussion around education equity. Education equity is, in the best of times, is a challenging task for schools across our nation, and particularly now in light of what we're experiencing. So excited to lead today's session, moderate today's session with some really important and esteemed panelists. Before we get started, I wanted to just share a few logistics and how we'll use the hour. Again, after brief introductions, I'll share some information just to get us sort of framed around this idea of education equity, where we are, particularly in light of the past summer we've experienced and started this new school year. We'll spend some time then, after 5 minutes or so, diving right into introducing our panelists so that we can dive right into our discussion. Our discussion will take the bulk of our time today. We'll take about 35 to 40 minutes. We really want to dedicate time to that and hear from our panelists around this topic. Also during that time, while we have some driving questions, we want to be sure to field questions from participants. We know that this is a topic that resonates with many, and we want to get your questions in real time. So feel free to use the chat pod. We'll make certain we incorporate those. Also at the end, there will be opportunity for questions as well. And then based on our discussion today, which I'm sure will be a rich discussion around this topic, we'll wrap up with some closing remarks that hopefully can frame a call to action of sorts for us based on what we've heard and how we in our respective work can continue this important work of education equity forward. So without further ado, I want to share, hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint on the screen. But just by a quick way of reintroduction, my name is Darren Reed. I'm excited to serve as the moderator for today's panel. Also excited to have, 28 years this year in the field of education, both in the public and private sector. That work spanned from being a teacher in the East End of Newport News, where I was fortunate to do some really amazing work with a great program called an Achievable Dream Academy. Really, the entire construct of the program was to address equity issues for students. I also served as a principal in various districts across Virginia, multiple districts from Newport News to Alexandria City. And then I've had the fortunate opportunity to experience both public sector and the private sector relative to education reform and education equity. I serve now as Senior Vice President of School Management at K-12, the largest online provider of online education in the K-12 space. We have a host of schools online and blended across the nation. And I also had a chance to serve as the executive director for New Leaders for New Schools over their Aspiring Principals program. And the whole idea of that program was to produce transformational leaders to lead work around equity in underserved communities around our country. So as I think about, me relative to this space, I'm very much connected and passionate about this topic. Through all of those experiences, education equity, and even in our online space, particularly now, we're trying to figure out how do we meet the needs of our students, remove barriers where possible, so that all students in school communities can achieve their potential. And so that's a theme that's been throughout my career. And, as I think about the last few months, particularly as the entire nation has moved to online education, I think this is, I recently ran some conversation with folks and how this is the first time in an unprecedented time in where, nearly every student in the country has some experience with online education due to the global pandemic. And as we've seen this unprecedented move to online education, there's certainly things that we're excited about as K-12 in our organization to take what we've learned over the past few decades and strengthen our service in this model of education, but also partner with districts and help inform this. This is used to be that thing over there in terms of virtual education, but now it's such a part of our lexicon. And I think when we resume some sense of normalcy across the country, I think online learning will still be a staple of whatever that will look like. But as being the virtual learning leader, some of the things that we've seen, is obviously to increase this access to online schools, we've seen states where we have virtual schools increase their enrollment caps to allow for more students to participate through changes in legislation. A lot of that work has happened over the spring and summer. We've also partnered with various school districts across the nation to help them make this leap and transition into online education for the fall. As we know, there was an abrupt stop in last spring. Even my own kids who were students in Virginia, Prince William County and Virginia Commonwealth University came home for spring break and just never went back. And so districts had to quickly find out. But a lot of districts have since spent a lot of time preparing for the fall and to prepare for this new reality. Just quickly, we've also seen various studies that have come out, one of which showed how that experience that students had in brick and mortar virtual versus traditional virtual schools. That was really insightful to really see that there is some level of expertise for those who've been doing this for a while and how districts can benefit. At K-12, we've also focused on career readiness education, even prior to the pandemic, but really looking at reimagining education, reimagining what success looks like. And there's a resurgence, as we'll talk a little later, about career readiness education. And lastly, at K-12, we've been, really hit the ground running with the sort of our own We Stand Together call to action, where our CEO, Nate Davis, has earmarked over $10 million for underserved students to receive free tuition to some K-12 private schools where we don't have free tuition in their state. So a lot has been happening, but as we know, as we've sort of leveled in the playing field relative to access to online education, there are lots of implications for possible continued gaps. Sorry, here is my screen. So just wanted to take another minute quickly to frame, this idea of, create a shared understanding around this idea of equality and equity. Access to quality education is directly correlated to an improved quality of life. There's tons of exit research that supports that. And as such, schools must figure out various ways to remove any barriers that exist. And over time, there's been evolution from this idea of equality to equity in education. If you think about it, 60 years ago, this year, the population in America's schools was roughly 85% white students. And as we know, that demographic has just continued to change. And it's forced schools and districts over the years to reimagine, equity and what does each student in each school community need. And you'll see here in short, equality is about generic, group focused, being equal, and equity is more adaptable, individual focused and fair. And that really allows us to meet the needs of students in school communities specifically. Just to take it a step further, there's these pictures that have been so infamous and famous, if you will, relative to this discussion. I've even seen these new pictures of, here's the reality. In fact, it's not as even, the equality gap is not even what we think it is. It's far greater, which gives us an even more daunting task. And then there's these expanded idea of even liberation, and how do we even remove barriers systemically and reimagine the construct of education. And lastly, I think, as we think about, again, education inequalities, they don't exist in a vacuum. They're tied directly to societal and economic gaps that schools don't necessarily have the power to impact. But nonetheless, and despite these challenges, many schools continue to move forward and tackle this challenge of education equity with some relative success in different places. But despite that, we continue to see decades of, after decades of school reform, there hasn't been the widespread stickiness, if you will, in terms of closing the gap across the board. In fact, we've actually seen it widening over the past 40 years. So there's certainly a lot ahead for all of us in this space. And again, I'm just really excited now to bring some folks on, our esteemed panelists, to really engage around this topic. And as we think about, and I'll just take one last moment to share, education equality, and even, the social unrest that we've seen in our country relative to police brutality, these are not new topics, but, in some ways there's been a lot of discussion about this sort of quarantine across the nation has created a collective awareness around this that has created an opportunity for us to maximize this moment now that we have this sort of attention and galvanizing around these. So our panelists are going to join us today, and I'm going to stop talking and introduce them to talk about how we can maximize this moment and extend the great work that's been done. So first I want to introduce, and I'll start just as it's how they're positioned on my screen, is Katrina Callsen. I'll invite Katrina to join us, and Jason, and also Rosa. But Katrina Callsen is vice chair currently of the Albemarle County School Board. She's also assistant city attorney for the city of Charlottesville and also a former teacher. So welcome, Katrina. We also have Jason Kamras with us, who's the current superintendent of Richmond Public Schools. He's previously held various leadership roles in Washington, D.C. public schools, where he was also recognized as National Teacher of the Year for his work as a middle school teacher. Welcome, Jason. Excited to have you with us. And then also we have Rosa Atkins, who's currently the superintendent of Charlottesville City Schools and has been there since 2006. Rosa has also been recognized as Superintendent of the Year by Virginia Association of School Superintendents. Again, I think we have the right folks to talk about this very important topic. And without further ado, I really want to jump right in. Well, first, let me take a moment to give Katrina and Jason and Rosa just to reintroduce yourselves briefly to our panel, to our participants.
Me first. I think you did a great job. I ran for school board with equity as my platform. It's something I've been focused on in my work, and I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and to field questions and be able to talk about this important work.
Thank you, Katrina. Jason?
Thank you so much. Great introduction. Yeah, you know, I'm superintendent in the former capital of the Confederacy, so equity is a really critical issue for the city of Richmond, something that we certainly talk a lot about and we're trying to do more about as well.
Welcome, Jason. And Rosa.
And Darren, thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. Superintendent in Charlottesville, been here since 2006, of course, and it's been a pleasure. We've had our ups, our downs, our in-betweens. However, we have an amazing staff, amazing people who work in the city, and it's just a pleasure to serve the Charlottesville community in this role as superintendent.
Yeah, again, welcome to all of you. And the exciting part is that all of you have this classroom experience, which is, as you'll know, that's sort of the pulse, I like to say, that runs through us all. We never forget that and what the student experience is like. So diving right in, you know, and first question I'll ask is, you know, as we focus on maximizing this moment, you know, I think it's really important to note the impactful work that's already underway that's moving the needle on education equity. And what I'd like to hear from each of you is, you know, what are some of the specific initiatives or strategies that you all have implemented in your respective districts and organizations around this topic? I know we touched on a little bit, but let's start with you, Rosa. What are some things that you have done to really impact it?
Darren, that's such an important question. And first of all, I'm going to reframe it a little bit and talk about what have we done in Charlottesville City, because the work of equity can never be accomplished by any individual. And so in our strategic plan, if you go to our website, you'll see that we have a strategic plan that has 4 points in it. And all of those points lead to equity. All of those initiatives are pointing at equity. We have initiatives around policy. So one of the first steps that our school board made was to implement an anti-racism and an equity policy that lays the foundation for the work that we will do now and well into the future. And then we start working on the culture in our school division. And how do you change the culture except by education? So we started with staff, senior leadership staff in our school board, in providing workshops for our school board on biases, anti-racism, understanding who we are and understanding our own individual biases. And then we expanded that conversation out to all of our staff members and our classrooms. And it was a big hit. There was pain, there was growth, a lot going on there. We moved then from culture and the workshops. We have workshops, matter of fact, one coming up on Friday, a lunch and learn, equity lunch and learn, where we're talking about changing the narrative at the lunch and learn. Then we move to our practices, and that takes us to the classroom. We can have all the culture and all of the workshops in place and all of the policies in place, but until we actually change the students' experiences in the classroom, we really have not hit the bullseye. So we have impacted how students engaged in honors courses, advanced placement courses. We've increased our graduation rate. Last year, we hit an all-time high of 95% overall, but 94% of our African-American students graduated high school. So we're impacting our students in their coursework, in the experiences that they have in the classroom, and in the foundations that hold up our school division by the policies that we have implemented and the actionable regulations that go along with those policies.
Oh, that's fantastic, Rosa. Thank you so much. Jason, we'll hear from you next, and then we'll go right to Katrina.
Thank you. And Rosa, that was incredibly inspiring. We looked to Charlottesville for a lot of motivation. So thank you. You know, like Rosa articulated, we've tried to approach this from a number of different angles. From the academic side, really taking a hard look at how we are, in essence, affording opportunity to our kids. So when I got here, one of the things I noticed is that most of our AP classes were congregated in some of our specialty high schools, and that at our comprehensive high schools, which largely serve students of color and low-income students, there were very few AP opportunities. So one of the things we've tried to approach from an academic level is to make sure that our comprehensive high schools had as many, if not more, AP opportunities for our students. That's just one example of really trying to get under the hood of what are the systemic inequities that in essence hold kids back, that don't even give them the opportunity to succeed. Another one, I'll give you an example. I found that the setting in our student information system for the type of diploma that kids would earn. So there's like a default setting. In Virginia, as folks know, there's a standard diploma and there's an advanced diploma. So in our specialty schools, the standard setting was advanced. In our comprehensive high schools, the standard setting was standard. And so again, that's something very systematic. So when people talk about, you know, I'm often asked, what does systemic racism mean? Like, what do you mean systemically? And so that's what I mean. Things that are baked into the system to hold kids of color and low-income kids back. So we shifted that, and that can go up and down the list on the academic front. On the talent front, like Superintendent Atkins noted, we are in the midst of doing anti-bias training with our leaders, which will then make its way down to everybody throughout the system. We're also, though we have a very diverse teaching population, we want to make sure that we have more male teachers of color. And so we've launched an initiative, which actually is being led by our recent National Teacher of the Year, Rodney Robinson. So we're very excited to have him leading that work. On the school culture front, we've done a lot to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. We still have much, much more to do, but have made a really big push on restorative practices in our schools this year. As part of that process, even though we are virtual, we have launched community circles in every classroom in every school across the city, informed by restorative practices to help build culture, build connections, which we know leads to better outcomes for kids. Lots more on the culture front. Shifting to our family and community engagement, a number of things we've done on that front. Some are symbolic, but important. We, a couple of years ago, renamed Jeb Stuart Elementary to Barack Obama Elementary. We're in the process of changing any other remaining Confederate named schools here. But I think even more importantly than those symbols, really shifting how we connect with the community. We've established in essence, a community hub system where we have staff, full-time staff who work in the community, so not even in schools. And their whole job is to make connections with families who are most marginalized in our community. And that really speaks to how we're trying to shift equity, not just from the school perspective, but also from the society perspective. We've even gotten into housing support, obviously food support, employment support. So we do see our mission as more than reading and writing, but actually changing some of the societal conditions, which we know lead to inequity. And then last, I'll just say on the operations front, we've also tried to begin to tackle this, looking at even setting goals for minority business participation in our contracts and things of that nature. We really feel that this is something equity needs to live in every part of the organization. So we're trying to look under the hood everywhere and see where are these systematic disadvantages that still exist and how do we disrupt them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm hearing a theme throughout the responses. I'll reserve that and I'll hear from you, Katrina. Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, it's been really great to hear Rosa and Jason talk about what they're doing, because we're doing a lot of the same things in the county, working on diversifying our teaching staff, doing training with school board members, top-down leadership. I have a PD session tomorrow to go over courageous conversations, a book about promoting equity in our schools. I guess from a school board member perspective, to add on, something that's been big for us is just ownership of the problem. And so some of the things that I'm most proud of are the fact that we have an equity dashboard where we put right front and center for the whole community to see these are the issues that we're facing. Only 2% of our minority students are identified as gifted, but they're overrepresented in special education, and everyone in the community can see that and know that this is a problem we need to work on. Another thing that I'm particularly proud of for our division is we're one of the first divisions, if not the first in the state, to have a specific anti-racism policy. And I speak to these things just because I feel like they help drive the community. They help drive teachers and the system to realize that we have to keep pushing for change. And also by having the data front and center, it helps you realize what's working and what's not working. So something that the equity dashboard helped bring to light for us was minority students and low-income students participation in our advanced classes. And I'm sure other divisions struggle with this as well. I think Jason spoke about it a little bit. And so we put in a program, and it's called MCube. And that at that point, I think I have the stats right now, we only had one Black student, middle school student, who was participating in an advanced math class. And so after we put MCubed into place, the assessment for, well, all of that, we had a much more participating, but in 65% demonstrated mastery of grade level content compared to 47%. And I know that's not, it's not where you want to be, but it's progress in the right direction.
That's fantastic. I have some notes here, and I'm hearing some specific themes, and just really great to hear, you know, each of you in your level of leadership and the sphere of influence you all have. And you're right, Rosa, it's a organizational challenge and response, not an individual, but it's really good to hear things like systemic high prioritization. We'll revisit that, but I really appreciate your responses there. I want to transition a little bit to a specific education model that's again making some resurgence now, and that's this idea of career readiness education and the sort of rebirth of career academies. I know at K-12 we have sort of the largest virtual online career academy, and with the technology now, there's so much more we can do. But in all ways, what role do you see a reimagining of CRE or even career readiness education playing in this in addressing education equity issues? Let's start with you, Jason.
Sure. So this is something which I've thought a lot about recently. There is definitely a lot of demand for this type of education that has come up recently. I will tell you, I'm a little, I have a little bit of cognitive dissonance on this. So on the one hand, I think if done well, it can be really powerful. That said, I've seen a lot of these types of programs in essence become minimum wage job mills, where we're funneling kids of color and low-income kids into jobs that will not lead to the middle class and will not lead to wealth generation. And so, we are actually thinking about this in terms of how do we set kids up for success to be prepared for middle-class jobs that are in high-growth industries and that put them on a pathway to higher education so that they can have wealth generation over time. So for example, we're working on developing a partnership with the local community college here, which is looking to build a new high-tech CTE campus. We're hoping to actually co-locate a new high-tech CTE high school with the community college so that kids will sort of come out of this campus with an associate's degree and an industry certification in fields that we know are going to be in high demand. We're talking about electric vehicle design, maintenance, and so on, which green jobs are only going to increase over the next several years. We're talking about power industry jobs, which with an associate's degree, we know kids could be making $80,000 a year. And many of these jobs are going to folks outside the area because there aren't enough kids in the area to do them, along with a commitment from firms to pay for the launch from associate's degree to four-year degree. So that, again, we're putting our young people on a pathway to not just these solid middle-class jobs, but ultimately to management and ultimately to ownership and then wealth generation, because really that is the access point to change the narrative. It's about intergenerational wealth development, which we know communities of color, low-income communities have not always had. And that's why you get the replication of so many of the challenges that schools end up trying to address in the first place.
Yeah, great point. I'm going to open up to Katrina or Rosa to provide a follow-up as well to that question about career readiness.
I would agree with Jason's assessment that there is a lot of interest in career readiness education, and the challenge is making it so that it doesn't basically enforce segregation, is what I would say. When I was a law school student, I did the child advocacy clinic, and I know that when we had students that were struggling in school and having issues, one of the first options we thought of is let's put them at K-Tech, our technical education center. That way they can get something and get, do all right. And that is not what it should be envisioned as. And so part of it for us is just constantly, for the school board side, is constantly having this focus that these need to be, basically academies are centers of opportunity. People really need to be able to participate with them. And it goes beyond just saying that, because we actually did implement quite a few changes as a board. Like we've provided free transportation to the academies and the career centers that we've opened. We've waived fees, but we're still not necessarily getting to the diversity and the numbers and the representation that we want to see. So that's what I'm looking for moving forward, is just how do we ensure that these academies and these opportunities, solar is a great one that's coming up, and I'm excited, are actually being utilized by all of our students. And so that's a continual focus for us.
Absolutely.
And I agree with both Katrina and with Jason. Excellent points on career opportunities for students. From our perspective in Charlottesville, career readiness actually starts at preschool. And so we start investing in our students at 3 years old. And we have a 3-year-old program in which the students are coming into our schools at 3 years old. And then we start building on the assets that the students bring into the school system. Because in order to move our students who are coming in from poverty to opportunities outside of poverty, we must change the narrative that they've been hearing for a very long time. So the coursework that we offer them, the opportunities to learn, the opportunities to explore and grow, expands and builds on an asset-based approach with the students rather than a deficit approach. I agree that sometimes with career and technical education, which can be synonymous with the career readiness, that tends to segregate our students. We have found that in our high school, the more rigor we engage our students in, be it good or bad, the less interested they are in, or the less often they choose to be a part of a career and technical education program. Now, that may be telling us two things, that the rigor is what they're craving and they need in order to stay engaged. But it may also be telling us that we don't have the right career and technical education opportunities that really are the students, that engage the students and grab their attention. So we need to give more attention to what they are and how do they align with the interest of the students. Yeah. The foundation is that we have to start building the confidence, the aspiration in our students to know that all opportunities are available to them. They can get a certification coming out of school and be ready to move into the job market, or we prepare them also to be able to go into a 2 or 4 year institution or some other post-secondary education. So yeah, all of those opportunities should be available, and we should be focused keenly on preparing each and every student to engage in that kind of work when they leave our high schools.
Man, this is such a, I think we could even have a separate full hour on this topic alone. You guys are, it's really great to hear you safeguard this idea of not replicating sort of the caste systems, if you will, of the past relative to CTE and career readiness. I just think it's exciting to hear. And I think Rosie, you hit on it, be mindful of if we do it, there should be certain elements to it that, and to your point, Jason, that still leads to sort of generational wealth and growth. And what comes to mind is this idea of new collar jobs that we've heard a lot about, and sort of how we all are evolving to realize that there are careers that exist now. It used to be there are going to be careers that our kids don't even know exist yet. They actually exist now that we don't even know are available. And industries are finding it difficult to fill those positions. And a lot of those are new collar jobs focus on things like cloud computing and cyber analysts, things that really drive our world. But as we, to your point, reimagine this area, we must include meaningful opportunities that don't replicate failure. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to sort of divert now from my questions. I'm so glad, I think we have Stephen Plaxton that added a question in the chat pod. And just a reminder, folks, we have a little bit of time left. Please feel free to add more questions in the chat pod. Question is for our panelists, so it's the first time we're all hearing this. So how hard is it to get funds allocated in a school division for career academies? I wonder if career programs are line items, or to fund them, do you have to take away funds from other regular school programs? Love your thoughts on that. Thank you, Stephen. And we'll popcorn. We'll let you guys.
And I'll start. So I need to think about what the question is intending to ask, because all of our funds are allocated and then we distribute them amongst our students and we create the programs. We fund those programs that we have with that allocation. So do we get specific funds for career and technical education? Yes, we get the Carl Perkins funds for that. It used to be much larger, much deeper amount of funds, very, very shallow funding now. However, I in most school division budgets, I'm sure in Jason's budget, there are funds that are set aside in order to make sure that we have certain opportunities where career and technical education is concerned. Masonry, the building trades, plumbing, those are standards and could lead to incredible incomes and career pathways for our students. In order to create new pathways, we then have to go about either writing grant funding or realigning how we allocate our funds in order to create those new pathways. We're not starting to get any additional funds from the state or from the federal government. So realignment has to come into play. And that's what we're dealing with in Charlottesville, having to realign our budget and our funding and the direction of our funding in order to capture those new and those more applicable career pathways for our students now.
Thank you, Rosa. And Jason and Katrina, if you want to add or follow any follow-ups. Well, thank you again, Stephen. And again, please add any questions. We have about 20 minutes or so, just over 20 minutes. We'll transition now to, again, what we're doing now. You know, we were face-to-face if this was in last spring, and now we're on Zoom. Zoom has become, you know, a noun, a verb, everything in our society. Everybody knows what it is, and we're Zooming today. And as we think about that, so are our young people, and particularly around their educational experience. So with online learning becoming such a natural part of, you know, our new normal, districts are moving more and more to online learning. Some are stopping and deciding they should continue. But really want to hear from you all about what are some of the possible pros and cons that districts need to be mindful of to ensure that, you know, we don't see this equity gap widen unintentionally. You know, and I'll just add one thing, you know, as we think about equality, if you will, everybody now, you know, has access or can have laptops, but is bandwidth the same? Are home resources the same? You know, that might make the experience, you know, not equal for students in our schools. So just want to hear your thoughts about pros and cons. And Rosa, maybe we'll start with you. Sorry to we'll just.
So one of the issues that we have been brought so clearly before us is that our access in online learning, access for students is not equal. That's whether you're in a cosmopolitan city like Jason and I are, or you're in a rural setting as Katrina is. The access is just not equal. It's not equitable. However, what we are finding quickly is even when we provide tools to help level the playing field for access as a school system, it's still very difficult for us to make that equitable because there's some infrastructure areas that don't come to the surface immediately where access is concerned that are foundational issues with students accessing the internet. And that is putting in the towers or putting in the cabling in a city area in which students and families are able to connect in order to then have the router in their home to have access, router or whatever in their home to have access. That's the major issue here with online learning. And we're making online learning as good as we can. But online learning still has some obvious weaknesses. And those weaknesses involve that social interaction. Being able to have the social emotional connection that students thrive on, that they need in order to develop naturally and to develop those relational skills that they need in order to be successful in life. Problem-solving skills in the midst of a community. And you can't replicate that in a virtual environment. So virtual is good, but we also have to have with that in order to be able to respond to the equity needs that our students have. We have to have that human touch in there also. So making this equitable is an incredible challenge in the COVID environment.
Thank you, Rosa. Jason, let's hear from you, and then we'll go right to you, Katrina.
Yeah, I agree with everything Rosa said. You know, on March 13th, when we closed, we had a few thousand computers in our school system. We have 25,000 kids. And over the last several months, you know, we have fiercely worked to become a one-to-one school system, but that wasn't the case when we closed. So the most basic tools for virtual learning are not equitably available. I'll give you another example. Rosa spoke about the towers and whatnot in terms of internet access. There are 6 large public housing developments in Richmond. None of them are wired for internet. So if you go by them and you mention the Comcast Internet Essentials $9.99, well, that's great, but you need to have the cable come to your house to use it. And none of those complexes do. So we've spent several millions of dollars on Wi-Fi hotspots. But here's a further indignity. Most of the public housing complexes are built with cinder blocks, which make it hard for those hotspots to penetrate beyond one room. So if you have 4 kids in a public housing apartment, oftentimes you either need to crowd all the kids into one space, or we need 4 hotspots or 3 or whatever the case may be. But it's not just the computer and then the internet access. It's also just the space to do virtual learning. So we talked to a lot of our families, and many of them didn't have a desk of any sort. And having 4 kids crowded around a 4x4 foot table, trying to do virtual learning all at the same time is quite a feat. So we went to our warehouse and found all the excess desks and chairs we had, and we started giving those out. We also knew that there were going to be some families in tight quarters. So we gave all of our kids headphones with a mic, so that you could be sitting next to a sibling and actually do your own work without it interrupting another child's work. And then there's the whole bucket of, what if you have a job, which many working poor families do have, that you cannot do remotely. Mm-hmm. You're a bagger at the grocery store, or a toll taker, or something of that nature. Like, you just can't do those from a computer at home. And so then there's the whole question of having the adult supervision and support. And so we've been working with the city here to set up emergency childcare centers. Anyway, all that to say, there are a lot of systemic barriers to virtual learning, which again, largely disproportionately affect kids of color, low-income kids. And so when we talk about systemic change, we're talking about things like there should be free broadband access in 2020, and at a minimum for kids under a certain poverty threshold. Mm-hmm. I get that telecom, it's private business, and they need to make a return for their shareholders, but there are certain minimum things that we have to provide kids if we're going to be serious about the work of equity.
Absolutely. Katrina?
Yeah, this is something, if there is something that keeps me up at night, it's the worry about what's happening to our students in this new forced virtual environment. I think virtual can be done very well if it's done intentionally and with student choice in mind, but right now everyone's having to do virtual whether they want to or not. There was a study out of Stanford a few years ago that was mentioned how achievement gaps are particularly pronounced around university towns, with Charlottesville and Albemarle being called out as one of the worst in the nation. New Haven up at Yale, where I went to school and first got interested in education, is also up there on the list. And they posited that the reason might be because these parents, these highly educated parents, it's almost there's a word for this, where you pool your resources, where you do the most that you can for your child. And you can't tell parents not to do the most that they can for their child. You can. Every parent is going to do what's right for their child. And the problem with virtual is what that looks like in numbers is the massive exodus of our kindergarteners going to private school. It's parents paying for tutors to help their kids through the virtual learning environment. It even boils down to just if you have community supports. It's forming pods, it's forming teams within your neighborhoods, and I worry about the long-term ramifications of that. And it's not even necessarily along income lines. I'm a working mom. I do have the social support of a pod of parents that we switch childcare so that I can work. But I don't have a job that I can stay at home. I don't, it's not a flexible environment. And I also, what I do at my job is work with kids who are in foster care, and those kids, it's difficult. And it keeps me up thinking how we can address this. And my solution is I don't have a solution. No, my solution is to allow families to make the choice that's right for them, which is why as a board member, I am for our lowest or most, the students that cannot read, that cannot work as effectively virtually as independently, are pre-K through third grade students, bring them back into the classroom as safely and as quickly as we can, is what I'm advocating for. On the optimistic side, because Darren, I know that you're a virtual learning proponent, and it can be great. The optimistic side is it is giving a lot of students choice. There's students that have struggled with bullying, that have anxiety around going to school, and there are kids that are thriving in the virtual environment. And so that's great. I'm hoping moving forward, when we return to normal, which I am hopeful will happen at some point, we can really use this as a growth opportunity and realize that virtual can solve a lot of our problems, budgetary problems, overcapacity problems. So I'm excited in that way, but I am also worried.
Yeah, no, obviously to your point, Katrina, thanks for the softball pitch, right? This is something near and dear to me. And just again, when I came to K-12 in 2008, they were specifically looking for educators to inform how to serve these changing demographics within this new online model of education. So that excited me with great fear. For all the reasons that you all discussed. I do think as our young people become digital natives, we as school institutions and thinking systemically have to adapt and adjust to be able to accommodate this new kind of learning. But without a doubt, I think all of you touched on this human aspect of it, and educating the whole child, and how schools, particularly relative to equity, help. In my classroom, elementary student, I treated it like, my kids, and my classroom was another room in our house. And, we recreate an experience for them. And I even looped with kids for 4 years. So, that becomes a fan. How do you do that in the online space? And I know we're doing a lot at K-12, which I won't touch on, but that's key. And then I think, lastly, this idea of what the home environment looks like. And as we know, I think go back to Ruby Payne from the 90s, and listening to her talk about how education in America is rooted in the middle class. And if we're not careful, we assume everybody brings those values and resources to school. And that's just not the case. And I think if we're not careful, we can see the same thing in online. So I really appreciate your responses there. I know we're winding down. We had another question. I think maybe will be our last, depending on how we follow up here. But from the chat pod, we had a question about your equity work, and specifically for all of you, maybe to chime in, can you discuss any higher ed and or corporate partnerships you may have as you engage in your equity work with your districts, whether it's through strategic planning processes, systems, financial resources, or any other partnerships to help you drive your education equity initiatives? And I'll leave it open for you guys to jump in.
Obviously Rosa should go first, since she likes to be put on the spot. I'm joking, Rosa.
I think I may have helped with that today.
I can jump. That's a great question, because honestly, I think we could do more work in that field. I know that recently we've been really pushing on the county PPPs, private-public partnerships. They really help from a budgetary standpoint. One that I'm happy to point to is Boys and Girls Club has solved a lot of the issues that we have around providing high-quality aftercare. Rosa probably can speak better about pre-K access. I know there's some partnerships happening in pre-K to provide early educational opportunities. And then back to the CTE question, CRE, what I'd love to see is an expansion of partnerships. And Jason mentioned that maybe Richmond has more, but in our county, finding partnerships with businesses to really provide that mentorship and guidance to get them into careers. But would love to see more of them.
Absolutely.
Jason, and
Rosa?
UVA is great too.
I'll go next, Jason, if that's okay. Yeah. So in our equity work, we're just pleased to actually partner with Albemarle County. We do a lot of work together. We do a lot of workshops together. So that has really been nice to have a neighbor next door to you that we pitch ideas back and forth. So that's a real benefit. We also have partnered with the Regional Equity Leadership Network, which is a national network that delves into research around equity and best practices and policies and approaches to driving the equity work. So we've been very fortunate to be a part of that organization. And then locally, we've had philanthropic groups. I'll give you this example. Very recently, we had a philanthropic group to contact one of our board members, Lisa Torres, and her name was Stephanie, and she asked, how can I help you? Because I know in the online environment, there are going to be some social emotional outcomes that will not be favorable for the students. And how do we help to bridge the gap that will be created while the students are separated from school? And she was able to help us to brainstorm and to help to develop, and our principals, our high school principal, middle school principal, and upper elementary principal together created a seamless program from 5th, 6th grade all the way through 12th grade to address those social emotional needs that the students have and will have when they continue in virtual learning or come back into our schools, and donated to us $500,000 in order to support that effort. Of course, the University of Virginia is always there for us. Ben is there, and Ben has been wonderful. They've got an equity director who collaborates with us. Dr. Williams collaborates with us. So there are a whole host of departments and individuals at the university who are with us, helping to guide us, our thought partners as we go along, our strategic planners as we're going along. Denise Johnson is our equity facilitator, and she has done a remarkable job in making sure that we stay connected to local, state, and national organizations as we continue with the equity work.
Well, I love UVA, but I got to give some shout outs to Virginia Union, historically Black college here in Richmond, to VCU, which is a huge partner, University of Richmond, J. Sargent Reynolds, which is one of the community colleges that we're working on that CTE program that I mentioned earlier. We have a lot more to do with higher ed, but we are grateful that higher ed is interested and committed to partnering with us. For example, Union, recently we brokered a deal where they give 50 full scholarships to 8th graders so that when they finish high school, assuming they meet all the requirements, they have a full ride to Union. And it's good for Union because they lock in 50 kids when they're 8th graders. And it's good for us because the kids can go through high school knowing they don't have to worry about financial aid. They don't have to worry about getting in. Their families can plan financially knowing that it's taken care of. They just got to keep their grades up. And, you know, with VCU, we have the Richmond teacher residency where they help train teachers for RPS and some of the surrounding school divisions, and other partnerships like that with some of the other higher ed partners. So we're blessed to have a lot of wonderful higher ed institutions. What we're trying to do is just make those partnerships as strategic and as equity focused as they possibly can. But again, they're great partners. And similarly, the business community is very supportive, as is the nonprofit community. One of the things we've been trying to do, again, is to focus these efforts. I think we've had a lot of what I call random acts of kindness. And we really want to get, you know, everyone's energy and passion focused to make the biggest impact. So for example, one of the things we're doing, and this is a multi-year effort, our goal is to have each of our high schools and middle schools take on a really rigorous and rich, exciting theme to both attract students and generate interest and improve outcomes, but also to give a platform or a focal point for our nonprofit and business community. So for example, we're hoping to create an arts high school where all of the arts institutions, including higher ed, could kind of go all in, from the symphony to the VCU arts program to so many others, to really have a concentrated, focused impact that can really fundamentally change outcomes for kids. So that's another way that we're thinking about this.
Exciting to hear that. Katrina, did you want to add to that? No,
I'm starting to think that I express my emotions too much through my face.
We all are learning.
I'm really excited to hear about the scholarships. That's so amazing. That takes a big burden. I was a low-income student myself. Both my parents dropped out of high school. So, I mean, you don't even think college is an option. To find out in 8th grade that you have
exactly.
I was just going to add in, I said jokingly that UVA is great, but it is schools are an HR business. The biggest difference that can be made in the life of a student is on the teacher that they have. And getting a good teacher is probably the first step. And so UVA has been a great partner, and I would historically back colleges as well. We were trying to reach out more to them. So just training the next generation of teachers and having them be mindful. So I really appreciate that they're sponsoring this and making it part of their goal and the conversation they're having with the next round of educators.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's great to hear. It's great to be surrounded by so many great colleges and universities in Virginia as well. That certainly helps, and certainly leverage them in the right way. We're at 11:58, and did not feel like it, at least to me. Obviously, I think we could have gone and can continue to go with this topic. I did take some notes. I first want to thank Katrina, Jason, and Rosa. Just your leadership, your insightfulness, your experience and expertise, and quite honestly too, which I think is important for leadership, your admission of more work to do and even unknown. I think that's important for us as leaders to model that this is not easily solvable, but we leverage our resources and positions and influence to impact that. So I really want to thank you all for that. I just want to wrap up with a couple key insights that I think resonated with me. As we think about what we can do now, and our first question, what struck me from each of your responses is three things. One, systemic change. This is not a Band-Aid. And I think, when I think back to when I started in 92 teaching and the experiences along the way, it is not that thing over there anymore. This is central to what organizations are doing in districts. And it's really great to see that the commitment behind really changing things for the long term and not for now. Also, the prioritization, this has become, part of strategic plans, as we've heard. And then also too, it's about people. Right? All these things have to transform themselves into changing bias, and then ultimately lead to a changed student experience and better outcomes. As we think about career readiness, I think you guys reminded us of some important safeguards that we need to be mindful of to ensure that we don't replicate a caste system. I think I heard the word segregation in the education experience, because just as much as society impacts equity in education, we have an opportunity to impact society by the experience and opportunities we give in our schools. So I think that's important, that as we reimagine CRE, we make certain that we learn from the past. And then lastly, I think as districts continue to, my own son's district, Prince William County, we're going to start back up in a couple of weeks, but now I think they are going to pause that. So I think everybody's feeling out our new normal, but as long as we are in online education, we have to make certain that, access is available to all. And how do we solve that rural challenge? And in some cases, the inner city. I'm from East Cleveland, Ohio, and metropolitan area. And I just learned recently that their bandwidth issues even there. So solving that is key. And then last two things is about the social human experience. We know that is central to education, no matter where you are. There should be some investment in that. And then making sure that we empower families and school communities to support students in the online space. Again, we're at 12:01, I'm sorry, but I want to again thank our panelists, thank UVA, Tom, and of course, all of our participants who joined us. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Darren, for your thoughtful leadership here today. And if folks need to run, feel free to do so. But Rosa, Jason, Katrina, we really appreciate you taking the time. This is such an important conversation. And we want to thank everyone who attended as well today. We hope that you'll attend other events throughout this week. We have 3 more panel conversations focused on issues of equity in K-12 education. featuring some wonderful educators and community partners in the space. So we'd like to thank the UVA School of Education and Human Development for their support and collaboration in building this program. And we'd remind you that all Cities Rising events are pay what you can, thanks to the support of our sponsors as well as community members like you. So if you enjoyed today's program, we invite you to become a contributing member to the foundation. And with that, thank you.